Hi, I'm Teresa Augustin with Norfolk Botanical Garden. One of my favorite parts of the natural world here at the garden are mushrooms. They're intriguing, they're mysterious, and I think they're just plain cool. Plus, they're an underappreciated workhorse of the ecosystem. Mushrooms are pretty unique. They're neither plant nor animal, however, they do have characteristics of both. Because of their uniqueness, scientists have categorized them in their own kingdom, which is the kingdom fungi. Here in coastal Virginia, we see a wide variety of mushrooms, especially from summer through fall. However, we do have some spring mushrooms. April is a great time to look for morel mushrooms that might be popping up around tulip poplar trees. Predicting a mushroom season is pretty tricky. It's all up to Mother Nature. It depends on how much precipitation or rain we get in the season. So if we've had a dry summer or a dry fall, we'll see very few mushrooms. So what exactly is a mushroom? They seem to be everywhere. We see them in the grocery store, we see them popping up in our yard, we see them popping up along trails when we walk through the woods. It just seems like overnight, they're everywhere. So a mushroom is actually the fruiting body or the reproductive structure of a fungus. And the fungus is growing either underground or it's growing through a dead tree branch, in wood mulch or in leaf litter, or even through a live tree. Mushrooms are often compared to apples on an apple tree. So the mushrooms are apples and the fungus is the tree. You can pick as many mushrooms as you want, but the fungus will continue to live and thrive and grow wherever it's growing. So what exactly is a fungus? So the fungus is composed of what looks like white threads branching out through whatever it's growing in. And this is called the mycelium. The mycelium is actually the body of the mushroom. It's what's actively growing and moving through organic matter. It's where you find the enzymes that allow the fungus to digest organic matter. So all living things need to reproduce in order to continue its species. So when conditions are right, the environmental conditions are right, and that's temperature, that's moisture, that's pH, it's a whole host of conditions. When everything is just right, the fungus will send up a mushroom to reproduce. Now within the mushroom are structures that produce microscopic spores, and spores are analogous to seeds in a plant. So when the mushroom produces the spores, they get carried off into the wind or an animal carries them somewhere and they land in a favorable spot, they germinate, and then they start to grow mycelia and the whole process starts all over again. Now that we know what a mushroom is, let's take a deeper dive into what they do. Mushrooms are an integral part of forest ecosystems. They can be broken down into basically three categories. The first category is the one we're probably the most familiar with, and these are the decomposers. They're nature's recyclers. They take organic matter, like wood, and break it down into nutrients that then can be cycled back into the soil. The next category of mushrooms are the more unique but very important mycorrhizal mushrooms. These are mushrooms that form a relationship with plants. If you take the word mycorrhizal and you break it down, myco means fungus and rhiza means roots. So the mycelium of these mycorrhizal mushrooms form a relationship with the roots of plants. And in a forest system, it's mainly going to be trees. So what that allows the plant to do is extend the reach of its roots in the soil. So the fungus is helping the plant find water and nutrients, and in exchange, the fungus gets the products of photosynthesis, which is sugar. Over 90% of plants have this relationship, without which they tend to languish. And it's especially important for plants that grow in really tough growing conditions because it allows them to survive and thrive. The last category, the third category of mushrooms, are the parasitic mushrooms. These are mushrooms that get nutrients from plants that are still living. They can parasitize plants, but they can also parasitize other mushrooms, other fungus, and also insects. Mushrooms just don't grow only in a forested setting. They can grow just about anywhere. It's a misconception to think that mushrooms only grow in dark and dank places. Wherever there's organic matter present and there's enough moisture, you can have a mushroom. You can see mushrooms growing in open sunny lawns. You can see them growing in medians along roadsides. You can see them even growing in your house plants or on a wooden fence post that's in your yard. Again, as long as there's organic matter present and there's moisture, you can get a mushroom. You may have seen mushrooms growing in a ring or a circle. This is called a fairy ring, and there's a lot of folklore associated with it. There are over 60 species of mushrooms that can grow in this pattern. So what's going on is the fungus underground, the mycelium is growing out in a circular pattern. And when conditions are right and it's time to send up a mushroom, the mushroom continues growing in that pattern. You can see fairy rings just about anywhere. We tend to notice them more in lawns because they just stand out. There's nothing else to compete with them. Mushrooms can also be a food source for wildlife. Many of the woodland creatures like flies and beetles, snails, slugs, box turtles, and even squirrels will use mushrooms as a food source. Just to remember, just because you see another animal eating a mushroom doesn't mean that it's edible to humans. Never make the assumption that a wild mushroom is edible because it can have unintended consequences. The more you start to learn about mushrooms, the more you read about them, you uncover all sorts of really cool facts. Mushrooms have a high nutritional value for us, both wild and cultivated mushrooms. However, you need to cook the mushrooms before you eat them. Mushrooms have a very hard cell wall that's difficult for our digestive systems to break down. So by cooking them, you break down that cell wall and our systems are able to access all the nutrition that is available. Mushrooms also have a high medicinal value, and there's a lot of research going on right now exploring the possibilities. There are several species that are currently being used for medicinal therapies now. Mushrooms can also help the environment by cleaning up contaminated soil. This is a process called mycoremediation. The fungus can actually break down toxins and turn them into non-toxic components. There's been many studies done, especially on soils that are contaminated with hydrocarbons like oil. So a lot of great potential and another tool in our arsenal for keeping our environment clean. When it comes to identifying mushrooms, very rarely can you make an ID based solely on its physical appearance. There can be lots of look-alike mushrooms growing side by side, but each one of them is a different species. The first thing you want to do is find a good guidebook that you're going to use out in the field. Here's a collection of some of the books I like to use. One of my favorites is Mushrooms Demystified by David Aurora. This book has wonderful information, it's written with a sense of humor, and it also helps tell you about mushrooms that may be similar to the ones that you're looking up. So it's a great, insightful book. A lot of these identification books will have a key in them, an identification key, and the key will ask you a series of yes and no questions, and the intent is to get you to be able to narrow down what species of mushroom you have. So by answering these questions, you're eliminating other possibilities and narrowing down your choice. It's also a good idea to have several guidebooks. I like to use books that have great information as well as pictures just to help me out and make sure that what I'm identifying is accurate. There's also a lot of great online resources for you to look at. There's also apps that you can load onto your phone. One that a lot of folks like to use is Seek by iNaturalist. That's a good one to try. At least that will get you started in the right direction, and then you can finish your identification using a guidebook. Since most folks are into identifying mushrooms because they like to forage for edibles, it's incredibly important that you do a thorough job identifying every mushroom that you come across and you're 100% certain of what you find. Misidentified mushrooms can lead to you becoming sick, or they can even kill you. So it's very important that you do a thorough job in identifying mushrooms. When it comes to identifying mushrooms, you want to become familiar with their physical features. You want to know what's the cap, the stalk, does it have gills? If it doesn't have gills, does it have pores? Does it grow without a stalk? Is it fan-shaped? Is it cup-shaped? All these physical features are going to help you identify a mushroom and answer these yes and no questions in the key. One of the other things you need to take note of when you're identifying mushrooms is where it's growing. Is it growing up against a tree? If so, what kind of tree is it? Is it a hardwood tree? Is it a pine tree? You also want to note, is it growing by itself or is it growing in clusters? These again are all attributes that will help you identify mushrooms and checking off those yes or no questions in the key. So once you have made your physical observations about the mushroom, the next thing you want to do is to take a spore print. A spore print is a fundamental part of mushroom ID and super easy to do. You just take the cap of the mushroom, this is the cap, here are the gills, this is the stalk, cut the stalk, pop the cap gill side down on a piece of white paper and just let it sit there for several hours. During that time, the mushroom is releasing spores, and the spores are accumulating to the point where you can see a color. And each mushroom has a distinctive color that will help you identify it. When you do a spore print, I would recommend that you do it either outside or in your garage and not bring it indoors. Don't bring it into your kitchen, don't set it up on your kitchen counter, because there's a lot of insect hitchhikers in mushrooms and you might get a squiggly surprise that you weren't expecting. When you're collecting mushrooms in the wild to take home to identify, make sure you get the entire mushroom. Dig out the base, because the base of the mushroom might actually look like a taproot or it might be swollen, and these will be important characteristics for identification. And make sure you put them in a paper bag or a waxy bag or waxy paper. You don't want to put them in plastic because mushrooms are made mainly of water and they'll turn to mush if they're left in plastic for too long. I hope you found this segment about mushrooms interesting and fascinating and informative. Great time to come see mushrooms is summer through fall. So take a walk through your local park, even your yard, or come on down to Norfolk Botanical Garden and take a walk on our trails. If you have any questions about mushrooms, please feel free to reach out to us here. You can get our contact information on our website. For Norfolk Botanical Garden, I'm Teresa Augustin.